All right. We have Lane from Quantum Newswire on the show today to talk about content syndication and how the conservatives are failing in getting their messaging out. Welcome to the show, Lane.
Hey, Bradley, how you doing? Nice to be here with you.
Good. So Lane, we've known each other for a few years, and from our industry, the similar industry that we share. But I wanted to give you the opportunity to talk about you and the company that you own or co-own, Quantum Newswire, and let's talk about content syndication. So give me a 30,000 foot view of who Lane is and who Quantum Newswire is.
Okay, cool, sure. So I'll with that 30,000 foot view, I'll start going back to 2010. And in 2010, I started my own digital agency. Back then, it was really just a website and SEO company. I mean, digital agency wasn't even really a term back then, I don't think, but it may have been. But anyway, I started a web and SEO company back in 2010, and just worked through learning a completely new industry for me. I had gotten out of banking and finance after the crash, and chose that industry, that endeavor very specifically. I wanted to have a business without walls. I wanted to be able to run my business from anywhere in the world. I didn't want to have big offices with lots of employees. Banking and finance is famous for brick and mortar and just staff and leases and all sorts of stuff. So I wanted to do a completely new business that allowed me to spend more time with my boys, who were really young at that point in time. And so I chose, the digital marketing world and launched. And then, so over the next 8 years, I built my agency and kind of worked through how to grow a digital agency. I learned every piece of the business. I learned ops. I learned fulfillment. I learned SEO. I learned, all the different software technology systems that, and tried a lot, just worked my way through. A lot of it was trial and error. A lot of it was just trying to learn from as many other experts that I could learn from that I know were kind of ahead of me. So 2017, back to 2015, I acquired a new partner, Matt. So Matt and I are business partners, and he and I are 50-50 on everything. We joined up, in 2015. In 2017, we launched a software division that Matt took and runs our development team and has grown that. And we began to develop what is now Quantum Newswire. But it was really we wanted to develop a tool that would help us solve some of the biggest pain points in fulfilling on search engine optimization campaigns for our clients. Link building was a pain. Just generating signals that that are ranking factors that will influence the search engines, will help create authority, will help create better map pack and better organic rankings was really our goal. So we set out on that goal in 2017. In late 2018, we launched Quantum Newswire to the agency market. So we decided early on that we were going to build Quantum Newswire for not only for our agency, but for other agencies as well. So in December 2018, we launched Quantum Newswire, just kind of in a soft beta launch to our network of 8 other agency owners that I knew in different groups. It's kind of one of the ways that you and I met, Bradley. But so in 2019, basically, was our first full year last year with Quantum Newswire. We're now at about 300 agencies, and a few white label companies that use Quantum Newswire for content syndication, really more for SEO purposes. We in 2019, we also I transitioned our entire operational or fulfillment team from being a team that just did fulfillment for our agency, which in the past all they did was fulfillment for our agency, and we transitioned into a white label agency in 2019. So as we focused on bringing in new agencies and introducing agencies to Quantum Newswire in 2019, it just made sense. We found that there was a lot of agencies that didn't have bigger teams, had issues or had challenges, providing, website development or providing SEO services, not really having the capability to do all the fulfillment themselves. So it just made sense in 2019 to transition to a white label operational team as well. So we have Quantum Agency, which is our white label agency, which does white label website development and white label SEO for other agencies. And then we also have Quantum Newswire, which is a standalone software as a service or SaaS platform for other agencies who do SEO for their clients. SEO is probably the number one product or solution that the agencies that use Quantum Newswire provide to their clients. However, Quantum Newswire is also good for traditional PR or press releases. It's good for reputation management. It's good for all sorts of applications in SEO. So that's kind of a 10-year overview of how we got to today and what we're doing with Quantum Newswire and Quantum Agency.
Can we drill down, because I want to kind of put you down a path, if you will, about, some of the people that are watching this don't understand about 90% of what you just said, right? Sure. I mean, I've had probably 50 messages in the last week directly to me, even asking what SEO was.
Right.
Right. So
agency owners that are brand new or that are marketing company owners or whatever.
Just in people that watch this show.
Oh, right? Okay.
Right. When we look at the audience, because a lot of the audience is coming from platforms like Parler that are trying, they're not in our industry.
Sure.
So I want to lead them down a path of what happens, and then I'm going to call a few of the different conservative news networks out in what I see as a failed opportunity, not a failure, but a failed opportunity to get their message out. So walk me through. Or I don't want to be the person that says everything, because this is your episode, if you will. But what happens, soup to nuts, of I have a website, I have a message, I'm going to write a piece of content, walk through that process of cradle to grave, and then let us talk together as far as opportunities to expound on that message or syndicate. And I don't even think a lot of people really understand what that is.
Sure.
But, can you walk us through
what
that?
People want is the outcome, right? So what we want is we want to have our content or our message, whether it's a marketing message or it's a message about a cause if you're a nonprofit, or a message about a product or a service you offer if you're a business, or maybe it's just a message about something that you care deeply about. And ultimately what we want is we want people to see that message. We want to get eyeballs on it. We want people to read it, consume it, if it's video or audio. So getting a piece of content, or I kind of go up and label it a digital asset, right? So
Sure.
A piece of content can be written, it can be an image, it can be a video, or it can be audio. Those are the four mediums of content that we can consume and that we can also, market online. And so the goal is to get any one of those digital assets, those four mediums of content, as many eyeballs as possible. And obviously, Google owns over 90% of the search market between YouTube, Google search, and I'm missing one. YouTube, Google, and Flickr. So between the three different major platforms that they have that get traffic, we want to orient towards ranking that content or that digital asset in Google. That's the process called SEO, or search engine optimization, optimizing that digital asset to get as many eyeballs in search or in different mediums of traffic that we can. And while Google does own 90%, there's still even that small 10% is still can be significant amount of traffic. So, Bing, Yahoo, Medium, Reddit, there's all these other traffic sources where people consume content. And so we want to get that content in as many eyeballs as possible. That's the process called SEO. So when what we've done over the last several years with Quantum Newswire is to try and take a very complex process and make it as simple as possible, so that you can also scale it. You can do more of it. How complicated it can be with SEO. All right. And the more competitive it gets, the more complicated it can become, for sure. But what we did with Quantum Newswire is we built that platform on the strategy of content syndication, right? So take content, and I've always been of the belief that it needs to be quality content. I've just never bought into the crappy content, spun content. I know people use it. I know people can rank it, but I just don't see much use in ranking crappy content. And I think it poorly represents whatever brand is ultimately behind that crappy content. So I've just never bought into that whole that whole world of SEO, I believe it's got to be quality content. I know Google is looking, and their algorithm and their artificial intelligence has gotten better and better and better over the years at really ferreting out the bad content and finding quality content. So you start with quality content, and then the process of syndicating that content is just simply the process of getting that content out on other platforms or other traffic platforms, other websites, web pages, whatever it may be. And there's a lot of places to syndicate content too, which is, I think, part of what we want to talk about here.
Yeah. So if I look, I'm going to use some examples. If I look at the standard process, I tell everybody that conservatives seem to be more ignorant, not ignorant being dumb, but ignorant being uninformed as far as what those avenues are for syndicating their messaging. Okay. So I don't want anybody to think that I'm calling conservatives dumb. I mean, it's just failed opportunity. So one of the things that I see, and I use, I'm going to use a few examples. If I use Gateway Pundit as an example, they have recently been de-indexed by Google.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So they're not showing up in search anymore. And we could talk, at length about opportunities that they missed. If I take PragerU as an example, as a conservative network, they're being threatened by Facebook to be shut down. Mm-hmm. Okay, so generally what I see with the conservatives is they're going to create whatever their piece of content is or their digital asset. They're going to push it out to social media. They're going to apply minimal effort to gaining relevant search. Even if I use the small players like the Joey Saladinos, Joey Salads, who's just pushing out messaging and trying to build up the subscriber base, they're putting themselves in a position of being threatened by the next shoe to drop that infringes upon their ability to get their message out. Is that an agreeable statement?
Yeah, 100%. I think Trump and his campaign are the first. Okay, we call him a Republican. I mean, he used to be a Democrat, but Trump, whatever he, Republican, independent, whatever he is, in terms of core beliefs, he's the first Republican who really has used all sorts of platforms to get the message out.
Sure.
Granted, he's being censored, obviously, not to the extent it's pretty hard to censor the president of the United States, but I think as a general rule, yeah, I mean that I look back at the Bush administration, who going back to a few presidents, but I thought they did a horrible job at messaging and getting their message out and communicating. And I think I think a lot of business owners, whether you're conservative or liberal, Republican or Democrat, I think people in general, especially those who have a message, whether they're podcasts or bloggers, do a fairly poor job of really syndicating their message out. They're pretty well captive to YouTube or Facebook or Google, and if one of those platforms decides to censor them, almost their entire message gets shut down because they haven't done more, to your point, to getting their message out on every platform possible and really paying attention to SEO. They put all their eggs in one basket, one website, one podcast episode, one YouTube channel, and off you go. And censorship becomes a real problem then.
So let's drive that down a specific rabbit hole of, I didn't discuss this with you beforehand, but the ability for the conservatives to piggyback using content syndication. So the idea, right, putting on my mad scientist hat, which you've seen that before, is the ability to create, going back to say Gateway Pundit, just as an example, I'm not trying to pick on them. When they publish a piece of content using the syndication network to actually push their conservative message through maybe what would be considered liberal news networks using content syndication. So if they create a piece of content right now, they go into syndication mode, and now they're not being seen in Google because they've been de-indexed, but they are being seen within their content through a press release or syndication process that now their content is on ABC. Mm-hmm. You follow me on that?
Yeah, 100%. I think it starts with, with content syndication. The core strategy before we ever built Quantum Newswire was we would build out, what we call a branded web ring of digital assets, a blogger blog, a Twitter account, a WordPress.com blog, a Tumblr blog, a Daily Motion account for video, all the different accounts. There's hundreds of them, but there's a good 50 that are really authoritative, probably a good 100 that you can really use. And we used to create, both branded and non-branded. We still do. I was like, we used to. We create branded and non-branded digital assets with all these different profiles. You can use branded and non-branded also, as a strategy if you're a conservative, and you want to avoid censorship. Well, use non-branded profiles, right? That don't have the Daily Pundit brand on it or the Federalist brand on it, but the message is still out on that platform, right? The content and so. That would be a strategy that I would use if I were, any kind of a blogger or any kind of a podcast, artist or whatever what have you. I would create branded and non-branded profiles as part of my syndication strategy, and then I would syndicate the content to those branded and non-branded profiles, and also syndicate the content through Quantum Newswire, and really boost the authority through to my branded or non-branded profiles. Probably a mixture of both, really. It's out on all these different platforms. How in the world is Google going to censor itself, right? Google's not going to, and it's got to find that content, and it's going to have to, decide that it's going to, actually shut down a blog. But if you've got 100 of these profiles out there with the same message, you create a real problem for those who want to be censoring your message.
I found myself in a very heated conversation the other day with a person who is extremely popular, and at first I felt very honored that this person would be having a conversation with me. We're not going to mention names, but the conversation turned very sour very quickly, and it was a conservative, and they said something to me about how unaffordable it was to syndicate content. And that was, that's a misnomer, if you will. And so I fired back, and I didn't take into account that I had information that they didn't, if right. You from the standpoint of knowing quantum and knowing how syndication works. And I asked them, I said, is your business, and this wasn't a sales pitch by me, it was a defense of their excuse, because I was very passionate about their creating good content. Mm-hmm. And I said, you're really just missing the boat. You're missing the boat because you haven't looked at this facet of what is a very affordable method to gaining millions upon millions of eyeballs. Mm-hmm. And that's the game. So, I asked that person what the process was, and their process was the standard. And you might chuckle at this, but they're going to create content, and they're just going to push it out to all, blindly push it out to, Facebook and Instagram and all of these other places, and then wait, right? Wait, pray. This shotgun approach to, just fire the shotgun and hope that one of those little pellets hits something that, brings meat to the table. Right.
Yeah. And, that wait, that's that wait and pray method is in this, especially in this age of censorship. If you're a conservative, there's going to be a lot of waiting and a lot of praying.
Right. So I kind of went on the defensive, and I said, and it's kind of interesting when I use the word ignorant, people always assume that means dumb. Right. Or tend to gravitate towards that. And I got fired up, and this person got fired up, and I said, I understand that you're ignorant about this, but I think if you actually take the time to learn, your platform is going to grow. And my intent of actually having this conversation is to point out an opportunity. But by that point, the person was way too defensive to listen to what I said. And I think that was about a week and a half ago or whatever. And that's when I reached out to you and I said, we need to do a show about this. Mm-hmm. Okay? Because, there's just so much opportunity. So let's assume and we lump everybody into the same thing because there's always an opportunity that YouTube's going to censor you. They could censor me tomorrow. Google's going to de-index me. Facebook is going to suspend my account, which I'm a professional at that. Twitter, I have a permanent ban on Twitter. I think as soon as they trace my IP address or even some of my VPS accounts, I mean, they just literally shut down everything that I have. So I think that the missed opportunity as you're going through this, because we have to understand, or we have to understand that by majority, the corporate world is going to lean towards the liberal side. And the reason why they're going to do that is because they're too afraid to lose. So they can't afford to lose. So they're always going to push for the mass and the free and the, that culture that they're trying to drive, which
I hope that changes.
Do what? I'm sorry.
I hope that changes. There's just all this talk about the silent majority, and I agree. The majority of people that are really the producers in this country are busy working. They're busy building their businesses. They're busy going to work or working from home these days, raising their kids. They're just busy. And, I hope it changes. I hope that the silent majority starts to make corporate America pay with their pocketbooks for the decisions that they're making.
Sure. And we can do a whole show about that, but
yeah.
I always use the word interesting. I'm trying to drive away from using that word, but we find ourselves in a position where somebody said, well, you're just a Trump, whatever. And I said, no. I said, it's obvious. Okay. What people don't realize about me is that I've never voted in my life. Okay. Never voted in my life. And part of that, we share when I got out of the military, I wanted to ensure that I would never be called back to the military. Mm-hmm. So I didn't register to vote, because if I didn't register to vote, good luck trying to find me.
Right.
And, so there were those reasons. And then part of it was, I just really didn't care about politics. But I told somebody the other day, I said, congratulations, you caused me to vote for Trump in 2020. And they said, well, you're just a blah, blah, blah Trump supporter. I said, no, it's not that I'm voting.
You've not been a big fan of Trump, in many cases. You've been fairly critical of him, just from me knowing you.
Yeah, it's not that I support Trump. It's that I'm voting against you. Mm-hmm. Right. And that person you could have watched their head explode. And I said, you have to realize that people like me exist. And we're realizing that you are dangerous. The far left group is just absolutely dangerous. That they stand for nothing, and they do stand for one thing, which is the destruction of everything, the entire foundation of what this country was built on.
They've made that clear.
Absolutely. So if your favorite color is green, they're going to cause you to be ashamed of that, because how dare you center all of your attention or focus on this being green being the end all be all of favorite colors. And it's really an attack. It's not even an attack on conservatives. It's actually what we're realizing, or what I think we're realizing, is it's an attack on even the moderates. I'm extremely moderate. Mm-hmm. I have extremely conservative views, but I'm extremely moderate as far as my path goes towards reaching solutions and finding compromise and bridging gaps, et cetera, et cetera. But that leads us into our next, and we'll come back to the quantum thing. I want to kind of push through and talk about the next thing, which is current climate, because I know you're passionate about that. And I want to, you're a father of two great young men. You're a husband of a wonderful woman. You are living your American dream, which is free from privilege, because I think you've busted your ass for everything you've ever earned. And what does that look like when they show up in your backyard? These, what I call, and I'm going to get kind of negative here, what I call the Twinkies or the Hot Pockets. What happens when they show up in your backyard as a veteran? That they're attacking the foundation of what you've worked for decades to create, and they just want to take that from you.
Well, I believe that what's happening in our country is truly a communist attack. I believe if you look at, and I've done my own research and my own reading, both for my own benefit and so that I can educate my sons, because they're the ones who are going to have to live with this country, after I'm gone, and raise their kids in it. And I believe we're under a complete communist attack. I believe the Communist Party, which the most powerful communist party in the world today is the Chinese Communist Party. And so I believe the Chinese Communist Party and communists, their communist comrades, if you will, in Cuba and Venezuela and any other country that embraces communism, Russia, dictatorship, they have infiltrated every major component of our society. They've infiltrated the media. They've infiltrated Hollywood. They've infiltrated Congress. We definitely have compromised senators and congressmen, congresswomen. And they have effectively accomplished almost every goal that they have for our country. They stated 45 goals for communism in America, and that was read into the Senate record because J. Edgar Hoover commissioned a man named Clausen to go and do a study of the threat of communism on America back in
1958.
The first years of the Hoover FBI. And as a result of his research, the Clausen read into the Senate record the 45 goals for communism in America. And if you go and read those actual goals, almost every single one of them have been achieved. I believe that we're under a major communist attack. And if you look at what's happening with Antifa and BLM and, the people in power in Congress, it's congressmen, congresswomen calling to defund the police, completely destroy, what the foundations of our system and rebuild it, fundamentally transform and rebuild it. You're right. They're trying to completely destroy everything that is America, and they want a completely new country with new rules, new laws. Obviously, we could go down the rabbit hole on all the things that they want to achieve within their communistic goal of taking over our system.
And I want to reference the book that you're mentioning, The Naked Communist. That's the book that, you can watch a YouTube video if you're lazy and only want to, watch 10 minutes, or you want to read a 400-page book. But I agree. I mean, if you change the context of what he had talked about in that book from Cuba or Russia at the time, because that was the big
Cold War, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and you transition that into what's happening today. It's extremely relevant to what's happening right now. The good news is that I can't see them winning, and the reason being is because the younger generation, and no offense to your kids or mine, but a majority, not ours or yours, a majority of the children were raised to be weak. Mm-hmm. And they were raised in a world of entitlement where they just deserve everything. And now they're transitioning, that behavior of participation trophies and safe spaces and, use your words and all of this other just absolute horse shit that was taught to them by teachers and now college professors, but they really lack the spine to make that happen. And we are seeing that. I mean, their form of whatever their bullshit messaging is, excuse my language, is, burning flags and burning books and trying to cause,
you see the behavior, the ways these idiot kids are treating, screaming at police. And, it's that entitlement culture that's now just been fanned into flames that the Democrats and the media have completely encouraged those deranged kids who are entitled Twinkies to go out and scream and stomp and burn flags and Bibles. And then I think there's a real purposeful element of it. Obviously, when you have busloads of Antifa, clad, in black and masked and all that, 20 somethings being dropped off in a city, there's actually, there's more purpose behind that, but they're just using those those entitled kids, and have convinced them that it's okay to go and, destroy, loot, riot, scream at police, what have you. But they're being used by people in power and with money for very, very specific communist purposes.
And when they actually bust people from Seattle and Portland to Austin.
Right.
That was interesting to me because they couldn't even find a group large enough within that specific local area to accomplish.
Yeah.
Right. So they had to bus them, 1,500, 2,000 miles in order to accomplish whatever that goal is. So I did the math and I said, wow. And I've had some very serious arguments on social media with those groups, and you've seen some of those posts.
Mm-hmm.
That is just hilarious to me because I actually brought up the point. I said, so a bus holds roughly 64 people on one of those buses, and there were 5 buses that were sent. Let's just call it 6. That means that your entire movement was really constructed of 350 dumbass hot pockets, and that's the entire movement.
Yeah, I mean, and maybe they've got a couple thousand, but the media makes it look like it's millions of these discontent people out on the streets, saying defund the police and all this other crazy shit. But it really is an extremely small minority. But that's why I say it's so obvious that the media has become they've been run through by the Communist Party, because they are absolutely doing the bidding of the Communist Party. And I think as Americans, we need to just start calling the spade and start calling these people the communists that they are, instead of calling them Democrats or independents or liberals or whoever they might be. And I'm sure there's some radical right people that are just as guilty of being, communists as Antifa or BLM, idiots. But
yeah, I've had some interesting heated arguments with the what I call the boogaloo bitches, right? This fake, you saw that. I think I sent you over a video, but what you realize, excuse me, what you realize over, wow, hold on one second.
Swallow, Ron. Coffee break.
Yeah, got to get the go-go juice. What you realize over the course of listening to these people is they actually don't stand for anything. They're just looking for the next prize out of their Cracker Jack box to come up with a cause.
I just don't understand how we haven't arrested all 500 to 1,000 of these idiots already. I mean, everything that they do in a city, other than walking down a street truly peacefully, which they rarely do, So, once you got these idiots in Portland, I mean, they should just be rounding them up by the busload, literally, and charging them all with the, destruction of federal property and throwing their ass in jail. That'll end the stupidity really quick once a bunch of their friends start ending up in federal penitentiary.
Oh, absolutely. Or even at the state or local level. But, I think the true failure is that, we've put ourselves in a position where we have weak governors, right? And I openly refer to ours here in Minnesota.
I don't know if they're weak. I mean, think of what they're standing up against. I mean, I think that we think they're ignorant, dumb, maybe just weak because they are afraid of the mob. I think we need to give them more credit. I don't think they're dumb or they're weak. I think they're making very purposeful decisions because this is how they truly think. They're like the parents of the kids who they've raised, who are out on the streets protesting and rioting and looting, legitimate business owners' businesses and setting fire to, to housing projects and what have you. I mean, it's.
So I'll use my backyard as an example in our government.
Yeah, I mean, you're right there at ground zero.
My nickname for him is Tim No Balls Walls, right? I mean, he just, between him and Jacob Fry and Melvin Carter, Jacob Fry being the mayor of Minneapolis and Melvin Carter being the mayor of St. Paul in the Twin Cities, what we experienced here, and I tell everybody that we were the testing ground. I mean, we were the epicenter of what happened. Mm-hmm. And we went through this process, and here's this governor who we didn't really know that much about at the time. and he stood up and did press conferences and actually laid out, and he based everything in his makeup, or his background is very interesting if you research him, is that he was a sergeant major in the National Guard, which is what he stands up for or uses that as a crutch. But he was also a teacher for a long period of time. So there's this mixture of kind of a toxic mixture, that he was part of the problem and then claiming he was part of the solution on one hand, and, or, part of the problem on one hand, and claiming he was part of the solution on the other. And we would watch him do these press conferences where he would, draw out, and somebody did a skit here in Minnesota, and they posted a YouTube video that YouTube took down, and it was like an SNL skit on the governor at that time. And it was hilarious because it was, they showed his press conference, and then they, zoomed over to this other thing where they were playing the part of protesters. Governor Walz said that they're going to be on the corner of Lyndale and blah, blah, blah. Let's just go 5 blocks down. Right. And I watched this all play out as a veteran. Right. So I'm, I have a little bit of inside knowledge, and so do you, as far as what those next steps should be. And the biggest failure that happened was, one, the burning of the 3rd precinct here. That wasn't the biggest failure. The biggest failure was calling in the National Guard and thinking that 300 National Guardsmen were going to just show up and magically solve the problem. So that when they retreated that one night from the 5th precinct, I think that literally sparked everything off.
Sure.
Because
they knew the mob could do, if they can take over a police station in the United States, and you're going to make the police officers retreat.
Right. Not only the police officers, the National Guard.
Right.
And then one of the misconceptions, because one of my civilian buddies of mine asked me, well, the military came in. I said, that ain't the military, dude. Right. That's the National Guard, Minnesota National Guard. And I'm, I pick on there's real difference between active military.
Yes.
And National Guard. So Johnny that shows up.
They're called weekend warriors, right?
Right. So he was coming at me with all this stuff, and he's like, well, there's your big bad military. And I said, no, that wasn't the real Army. That wasn't the real deal, the active duty. But that's a whole different discussion. But I think that actually caused the playbook to be set, put in place, because everything happened after that. Mm-hmm. And if you look at the timeline, the next 3 days after the National Guard retreated, that was a win.
Yeah. Portland, Seattle, everything blew up.
Absolutely. Because they established those wins, and we've yet to put them in a position where they've had to face failure. And I openly blame the governors and the mayors for that. I think they're failed leaders.
I come from a law enforcement family, so my dad and my grandfathers are both retired police, law enforcement. There's no way those cops said we need to leave this precinct. They were ordered to retreat. By mayor, governor, both, whoever it may have been. But that order came down from on high to pack up and take what was important and leave that precinct to the mob. And I agree. I think that was a spark of confidence for the radical left and Democrats, that if they can do that in one city, why not do it in 10 or 20?
I've been openly just absolutely destroying our local politicians, mayors, governors, city council, et cetera, et cetera. I've been on full attack mode, using my weapons, which is pointing out their inefficiencies. And I came up with like an epiphany probably 2, maybe 3 weeks ago. I was actually reading about the stuff that was happening in North Carolina, where you live. And I said, wow, there's no qualification to be the leader other than the vote. And I think that's the problem, because, you take, what's her name out of the police of Chief Best out of Seattle, who has openly stated that these unqualified elected leaders are tying our hands from being able to do our
making policing and law enforcement and community safety decisions.
So what qualifications does Jenny, Durkin,
Right.
Seattle mayor, have to even tell the chief of police how to police?
Right.
What did she do before then, or Ted Wheeler, or
Well, we're now seeing the effects of having that kind of idiocy making decisions for our communities. Our kids live in fear. Our communities and our businesses are literally being kind of. I mean, you see now. I mean, BLM is literally taking mafia tactics and holding businesses hostage in their communities. Either pay up, be a part of the reparation movement, agree to buy a certain percentage of all of your supplies from other black-owned businesses, or we're going to put you out of business. And they've already done that.
I think they made a mistake when they fucked with the Cubans, though.
I think they made a mistake when Democrats really thought that this was going to somehow, I think they really think that they can cause all this chaos and be proponents of defunding the police and destroying our system, and they really think that that's all going to somehow be attributed to it's Trump's fault.
Sure.
I think that's the Trump derangement syndrome. Like anything bad that happens, if they just say it's Trump's fault, then it will somehow, everyone else is going to believe that it's Trump's fault, right? But I think they're short of massive, massive fraud. The Democrats are going to be kicked to the curb in mass in November. I mean, unless they figure out a way to truly commit fraud and get away with it on a massive scale, because I don't see how there's, I'm a big fan of the Walk Away campaign on Facebook. With Brandon Straka. I love that group. I mean, it's just awesome watching. Truly, I mean, Democrats, life for Democrats, and what I would call people who have really liberal, thinking and stances on things. Totally fine, but they are leaving the Democrat Party in mass, right? And that Facebook group, they detail their stories one by one as they walk away from the Democrat Party. But I think they've gotten so deranged that they think they can blame everything that's bad on Trump, and somehow the voting bloc is just going to go along with it.
Yeah, it's one of the things that I tell people about my intent for this upcoming election, that absolutely it makes both sides just their heads explode, is that my intent is to do two things. And you may not agree with what I'm about to say, but I'm going to go in and I'm going to cast one vote for President Trump. And then all of my other votes are literally going to be against whoever is currently in office.
It's good. I mean, you can't disagree with that. I mean, unless you want to do all of the research and find out, person by person, which most of people don't have the time to do. That's not a bad strategy, honestly.
But if you're a diehard Republican or a diehard, Democrat, I mean, what you're going to vote against? Yeah, because if I don't know who they aren't part of the solution.
I agree. I mean, I would vote against Mitch McConnell. I mean, I would say that, you would probably label me as a Republican, although I'm more of a centrist, libertarian, independent, but there are absolutely no doubt there are Republicans who are just as corrupt and just as big as a part of the problem as well, what I say is the majority of Democrats. But there's a few Republicans I would definitely vote for again if I were in their state as a senator or a congressman. But that list is short.
Yeah, it's here's a good research assignment for your homework assignment. Is I was so excited and I couldn't vote for this person. This person was actually, if I lived in their district, I was going to vote for this person. His name's Dean Phillips. Have you ever heard of him?
Mm-mm.
He's from Minnesota. He ran as a Democrat. And the reason being is he was trying to unseat a Republican, which he was successful in doing. But I would listen to his debates, and it was funny because he's a very rich guy. He's part of this big brewery family here. So it wasn't about the money, but he ran against the Republican guy. I can't even remember his name, but he was taking all of this special interest money and he was calling him out. But Dean Phillips would actually drive around Minnesota in this ice cream truck, right? It was brilliant. And he would just say, let's talk about what you believe in. Let's talk about why change needs to happen. And he
town hall on the road.
Yeah, he would rip.
Good idea too. Just touch the people.
he would rip apart both sides. And in his debates, he'd talk about how, Pelosi and all, he would talk shit about everybody. And I mean, I was like,
duly warranted too.
Do what? I'm sorry.
I said very much warranted to talk shit about everybody.
Yeah, and he would just
we're seeing an absolute failure in leadership at all levels. It's just it's astonishing to me.
And then he was elected, and
Yeah.
you've never heard of him, right? How sad is it that you've never heard of this guy, and I've never heard from him since? And so there's something happening in in Congress that I just tell everybody I'm not willing to drink anybody's Kool-Aid. My vote is never going to be owned by the Republicans or the Democrats. I will rent you that vote.
Exactly.
And
month by month.
Right. And I may love you today, but getting an A and keeping one are two very different things. Let's talk a little bit, because I know this is a passion of yours, and let's just kind of switch gears. And I know we're not going to get to we're already at 45 minutes, so we're not going to get to the Second Amendment stuff today, if that's okay with you. But I'd like to talk about Black BLM in sports, because you have a son who's playing in whatever it's called. I don't know. Yeah, hockey, but some division of hockey. It's like
they're junior hockey.
Okay, so he's in this environment where I think that's the next sport that we're seeing this Black Lives Matter group go after, and this virtue signaling and everything else. So I think it may become very real for him and for you as a parent of an athlete who's trying to aspire to be a professional hockey player. That, what does that environment look like? And I'm gonna leave that to you, because I don't know much about it other than the fact that I'm not gonna watch them as soon as they turn into the NBA or NFL, right?
Yeah.
So talk a little bit about that.
Well, I grew up a lifelong Packer fan, growing up in Wisconsin as a cheesehead, and this will be the first season I won't watch a football game ever. I'm gonna take the whole season off. I've grown up watching football, being, like I said, a lifelong Packer fan, and hockey is a second sport that's the real passion. I like playing it, but my boys have played it for 13, 14 years. And should play in college. If they stay injury free, they'll both play in college. Hockey is more of a blue collar sport. That's why I love it. That's why I got my boys into hockey. I thought it was safer than football from an injury standpoint and concussion standpoint. And I didn't really like the culture of football, especially as it's changed a lot over the last, say, 20 or 30 years in my lifetime. But getting my boys into hockey, I just knew it was a blue collar sport, and it's the kind of sport where you can't hide. Like, if you're not going to be a hard worker, you can immediately see somebody on a hockey rink that's not working hard, because of the speed of the game and the physicality of it. So, that's why I got my boys into that sport. And they luckily, for me, I love it. They turned out to love it and want to really play it at into college. But BLM, first of all, I've done my own research. BLM is nothing but a money front for the Democrat Party and primarily white liberal politicians. The money is being handled by a company called Act Blue. Act Blue is a super PAC for the Democrat Party. I forget her name now. Her name is Suzanne somebody or another, but she's the one who handles the money for BLM. What's that?
Rosenberg,
that's it. Yeah. Susan Rosenberg. So, indicted felon for being a domestic terrorist, and she's the one handling the money. A white, domestic terrorist is handling the money for BLM. So,
let me add to that for just a moment. So she was sentenced to 45 years in prison for a bank robbery where police officers were killed. Mm-hmm. Is that accurate?
Yeah, and then she also had she made all sorts of terroristic threats too. I know there was, so this is a person who's now out of prison,
And in between Bill Clinton's trips to Jeffrey Epstein Island, he commuted her sentence.
Yeah.
I mean, when you just start reading about this, it's like, holy shit.
Yeah, I mean, you can just connect the dots. It's unreal. Like but it's like it's almost so unreal that when you say it, it's like, nah. I mean, that's got to be conspiracy theory. But it's all checks out. So I believe the whole BLM movement is a communist tactic. It's just a turn. It's to incite a race war, to achieve civil unrest, because the more civil unrest, the more freedoms that communists can strip away, which is exactly what they've been effective in doing between COVID and all this civil unrest that they're inciting between Antifa, BLM, rioting, looting. It's all just to try and pit people against each other, create anger, and create civil unrest. And it's been working very good. I just hope that in November we, as an American people, exercise our opportunity to really change, like you said, just completely change over the status quo and replace people with somebody new and give them a new shot. But back to BLM in sports, because of what the NFL has done with kneeling. I mean, you and I have a different connection with the military and probably a sensitivity to it that some people don't have. But I'm totally against kneeling. I mean, what pisses me off is that the NFL, all the way up until BLM, had not allowed any athlete to really be their own. They remember Tim Tebow. I mean, when he kneeled, that was outlawed. Like he was not allowed to kneel for his cause.
Mm-hmm.
There's been several other athletes that over time that have had their own cause and they were shut down. But all of a sudden, BLM, became a cause that was worth allowing. Starting with CK, the ability to kneel, at the national anthem. So I believe it's just gone too far. I believe that BLM is they are a domestic terrorist group. I think Trump doesn't want to label them as a domestic terrorist group just because he doesn't want to be perceived as being against Black people. But his actions speak louder than anything else. He's done more for Black communities in 3.5 short years than any other president's ever done in 4 or 8 years. But I think that he's sensitive to that, which is why he's labeled Antifa as a domestic terrorist group, but not BLM. But BLM is right there with Antifa with the same or worse tactics. If it creeps, it's already starting to creep into the NHL. Unfortunately, I've seen a couple of images now where players were kneeling at the blue line during the anthem.
That's scary, isn't it?
It pisses me off. I mean, it just does. It's like, I'm just, all lives matter, right? Kids, white, Black, Asian, Indian, it doesn't matter. I'm just of the belief that we're all created equal. That's what makes our country great. Is we're a big melting pot of people who believe that we're all created equal. We all have the same rights, the same freedoms, the same abilities, and the same opportunities. We don't all start at the same place, and I think that's why here too is this call to be fair. It's impossible to create a society of fairness unless you're going to create a ruling class, and then the fair class, the ones who get everything else. It's all equal amongst the fair people, right? But there's a ruling class that determines what's fair and for who.
The breadline. Right? Let's create the bread line, or not, because that's insane. Let's not take away the efforts or the accomplishments of the many to satisfy the few. And I've had some, I actually love having these conversations with certain people, because it was brought up to me, about how important it was for us to share the BLM movement within sports by somebody. And I said, why? I said, that doesn't make any sense to me. I said, do you like horse racing? And I gave this as an example. But yeah, that this person happens to be a very avid, not into the betting side or gambling side, but they actually own race horses that race locally. And I said, you own race horses, or you love horse racing? And he said, yeah. And I said, well, Gibby, tell me, do you really care how the horse feels before it starts the race? Right? Do you really care how the jockey feels before they start the race? And he said, well, no, I just want them to win. And I said, and that's what sports fans want too. They really don't care. And he's big into football, and I said, do you really care? I said we have to get to the point where we realize that these are performers, and we're paying money as fans,
haters, fans, whatever, yeah,
to watch them perform. And the same is true with Hollywood. I don't care what Meryl Streep's political views are. And I always use her as the example because of the pesticide thing from the 80s, where she testified in front of Congress that she was an expert in apples because, after all, she made some frickin' movie about apples, right? So she was an expert and testified in Congress. Says, we don't care about how these people feel. And we have to get to that point where we make them realize that their paycheck will stop as soon as their paycheck is based on whatever their personal.
I think we're at that moment. Yeah. For me, that's where I'm like with the NFL. They've pushed too far. I'm done. I mean, I won't watch them all season. And I hope, like I said right at the very beginning, I hope that there's a lot of that silent majority of people who just are more tolerant. Let the entitled children, kneel for a while, and get their feelings out. But I think it's become to the point where sports have been taken over, or many sports have been taken over by, one social cause after another. And I'm tired of it. I want to break from politics. I want to be able to just go, like you said, go watch some, athletes compete and perform. And I love to watch the competition. That's what, that's what sports fans want. They love to see that competition. They're not there to watch the politics and the social causes and all this other. And these guys think that they're using their platform, which, they think they've got a platform, right, of viewers and getting they're syndicating their content out, using TV and media. And I think that, their pockets are going to be affected negatively by their continued push to use their platform.
Well, it has to be. So I always use Colin Kaepernick as the example that here's somebody who is being sponsored by one of the biggest
sweatshops.
Sweatshops, right? So they're enslaving a foreign country to make clothing and tennis shoes, and they're paying this guy millions of dollars to push this whole narrative of enslaving a culture.
Yeah. Nine police officers nine black people were killed last year, right? I think was a stat. There were 9 black lives, shot by police officers, right? But
unarmed. Unarmed.
Well, okay, right, unarmed. How many Chinese citizens in those sweatshops? How many kids that work in those sweatshops died as a result of the child slave labor that Nike, employs, in China? And I think the hypocrisy is astounding. It's sickening.
Without a doubt. It amazes me that people aren't smart enough to realize it. That they're so, when you look at that extreme liberal left, that they're not, they will fight for it. Well, look at Nike stock, right? And I actually made a video about it, which isn't even popular on my channel, about, Nike stock down 30% or 38%. They had to lay off their slaves, right? And it was out there. And the reason why I created it was, to try and point out that hypocrisy that's happening. And it amazes me how uninformed people are. But going back to the sports thing, when assuming you weren't into, you didn't have children invested in this. And the joke is I tell everybody, I grew up a Lions fan, so I'm not going to miss the NFL. Right? I'm used to losing, but when you buy a ticket, you're buying a ticket to watch a game. You're watching entertainment. You're watching something that's supposed to make you happy, not throw shit in your face of what you should care about. Because now you're putting me in a position that I don't enjoy that. I don't enjoy that.
I just don't understand the mentality of these athletes that think that even like, this is why I think hockey. Hockey is, we can just be blunt. There's not a lot of black hockey players, right? So you look at, most, most college hockey athletes are white. I mean, it's just the way it is, right? So you just use that as an example. I mean, I can see why the NFL. I mean, they got the majority of their teams are black athletes, right? So I mean, it just makes sense that they have a different audience there. But as an athlete, why would you want to piss off even 10% or 15% of your fans who are there to watch what you're saying, a sport, and just perform and to watch the competition by taking up a social cause that you're passionate about on the field? Let's just say it's really, really genuine. It's authentic passion about the BLM movement, right? That you want racial injustice, to be. Which I also think this is the stupidity of our country, right? We every time there's a mass shooting, we say we need to stop. We need to prevent all future mass shootings. We need to stop this violence. We need to do things that are gonna get our society rid of mass shootings or get rid of racial injustice in our society. Well, as long as humans are a part of society, there's going to be racial injustice. There's going to be hatred. There's going to be all sorts of evil. And we're not going to be able to control or legislate that, period. We can't legislate evil out of our world.
That's a great point. I talk about passing social laws, and every time you see local or state government, whatever that looks like, start passing social law, it immediately alienates a certain percentage of the population.
You're taking more freedom away. It's inch by inch. It's the death by 1,000 cuts for the communists, right? I mean, take these social laws. That's why civil unrest. Well, let's come up with more laws and more things let's take, there's police violence. Well, that police violence exists, right? There are some bad apples that are cops, just like there's some bad apples in Congress. There's some bad apples at just about every company you might go work for. There's a bad apple everywhere you go because it's called the human condition. It's evil. But we try to take these different social laws and legislate evil out of our world in the name of trying to make it a better place. But all we're doing is eroding freedom after freedom after freedom, not realizing that that's the Second Amendment argument, right? I mean, you can make laws about outlawing guns, but criminals don't really care about the laws, right? They're going to break the laws. That's what makes them a criminal and a murderer to begin with. They really don't give two shits about the law. So the more laws you create, all you're doing is infringing on the freedoms of the law-abiding, while the criminals amongst us will never follow any of these laws.
I'm gonna do an episode later this afternoon about and it's meant to be funny, but I'm going down this road of bad parenting, right? So as soon as I go after the parents and I blame the parents of the criminals, it sparks this emotional outcry from the foo-foos that I don't know if you saw this, but I posted this article about the cops arrested this carjacking ring. Did you read that article at all?
I read an article about a carjacking ring, but I don't remember if it's the one you're referring to.
Okay, so they just arrested, I think it was yesterday, these carjackers. And they were, holding people up at gunpoint and stealing their cars. And the three criminals that were arrested, two of them were 13 and one of them was 12. Okay, so, I actually thought about it and I said, wow, look at the angle on this. I don't even blame them at that point because 12 and 13, that's the parents' fault. And I'm going to start calling out the parents because the parents aren't parenting. And the parents are allowing this this bullshit to happen with their children, and not all, right? So I'm just going to start putting the buckets out. It's not liberal or conservative. It's not Republican or Democrat. It's good parenting and bad parenting.
Yeah, 100%. I think there's a real case to be made that the true inner cities in our country are the kids that grow up in those environments, don't see opportunity the way that other kids who don't live in those neighborhoods see opportunity. And that's a problem that's got to be solved. And that's why I really give Trump, he's really turned loose certain leaders in his administration to really go after and help turn that around, because I think that's going to help. There's gangs will exist as long as there are no parents or there's no opportunity, and I think you have a lot of both in our inner cities. You have a lot of single parent households, or no parent households, really, for that matter, because mom or dad or both are strung out on drugs or alcoholics or whatever. And then they also, there's a lack of opportunity that they see. There's a lack of vision of opportunity in those, when you live in that kind of condition day after day after day. And as long as those conditions exist, we're going to have kids like 12 and 13 going out and doing carjacking. But they've also been conditioned to learn that that's just somehow okay, which is.
At what point, if they're 12 and 13, did they start learning the process?
Right.
That's the sad part.
And that's where I think that's what I think it's gangs that teach that, right? It's the kids don't have a parent at home. They don't have an environment at home that gives them forward-thinking vision and opportunity for their life and their future and success. And so the kids end up on the street with gangs because they need to belong, and they don't want to be the one outcast who's not a part of this group or that group. And in the inner city, it's not just cliques; it's real gangs. It's real gangs and real gang violence, and that's become culturistic inside those inner cities. These kids grow up with that as part of their culture. From the time they're 2 and 3 and 4 years old, their older brother or their dad is a part of a gang, and then it's just it's generation after generation. And I do believe we have. I don't think that's racial injustice. I believe that's just injustice, right? And we need to try and figure out more ways. But you look at these cities where this exists, they're all Democrat-run cities, and they've been run by Democrats for 30 to 60 years.
That was the point I was getting at. I'm actually compiling a list right now of the top 374 cities based on population. And there's a lot of
the corruption that have just. It's not like the Americans haven't put a lot of tax dollars into trying to revive inner cities and create opportunity there. But I believe there is so much corruption, where that money just gets siphoned off into this pet project, that pet project, this or that. And, the money is really not leveraged to really cure the problem. And then it's a real problem. It's not like it's just going to go away because we throw some money and some people at it.
So if you look at this list, and I'm only I'm in the middle of between 100 and 200 right now. I'm actually breaking down who the mayor is of the city, political affiliation, race, and gender. And then I'm doing that with the police chiefs as well. So
going back in history too, like going back, 3 years, 5, whatever, just now, current.
Just right now, right? Just establishing current climate. You would be amazed at, just because I'm going from the top down. So starting at the, New York City, working your way down to the Toledo, Ohio's, or the Asheville, North Carolina.
Is there one Republican-run city or
there are?
Because really governors, they obviously have some influence on law enforcement decisions, but it's the mayors right now that are really affecting the and promoting the defund the police and really restricting police.
I was surprised because I always wanted to find the narrative for right or wrong. And I think when I actually come out with that list, I think a lot of people are going to be surprised by what they see, that what they believe to be true on either side is fairly accurate. If that's a good phrase.
I've seen the list myself. I've put the list. I went down one day myself and created the top 15. From New York City, Chicago, Portland, Seattle. Just down the list, and they were all 100% Democrat-run cities. And then there's some governors that like in Florida, you have Miami, right? You got a Republican governor, but you got the city there. It's run by Democrats and has been for decades.
Yep. And I wanted to take the governors out of it because I wanted to drill right down to the local level.
Because they're the ones who are actually influencing what's happening inside their city, not the governors.
The mayor is in charge of their police department always.
Yep.
And I openly blame when Jacob Fry went out and stood in front of a whole bunch of people and literally I thought the poor piece of shit was going to cry because he's standing in front of these people that are yelling at him. I said it's one, it goes down to the mayoral level first, right? Instead of doing this top down, because one of the things that pisses me off is to read something and hear everybody blame the president for everything. Okay, we are a republic of states that have governors who run those states individually based on cities that are run individually. that's an important process within our country, but everything is just blamed at the guy at the top. And I really just went the flip off on what's his name, Gates and Nunez. I think it was Nunez. That I said, you guys are all talk, right? And everything I see on social media, and I'm calling them out, not because they're one party or the next. I don't care what your next news show is going to be or what show you're going to be on. You are not a celebrity. You are a politician who's been a
servant, really, is what you're supposed to be.
Yeah, they're supposed to be out there doing something. It goes back to that. You remember Oral Roberts, his big thing. Don't just sit there, do something.
Right.
So when I look at these politicians, all of them, man, I just want to crawl out of my skin. I'm like, what the F are you guys actually doing?
Right.
Other than talking, what are you actually doing?
Out of both sides of your mouth, usually, too.
Yeah. And that's my criticism of Trump. Right. And they said, somebody said, well, what would make you actually like Trump? Because I'm not a fan of his. I think he's necessary. Right. So it's not a love affair. It's literally, I see him doing the right thing. I see him taking the right steps. But I was like, man, if you could just get him to shut the fuck up and let Kaylee talk for him and take his phone away. Right. And don't allow him to be this bumbling idiot or buffoon in front of the press, and just use the delegation that is necessary from that seat and use those people who are good at what they do. I said people would actually love the guy if he would just shut his mouth, right, and go out and do the stuff that he's doing. But on the other side, I think, wow, look at what this guy's accomplishing. Doing all of these.
Look at what he's doing, not what he's saying.
Yeah. So I appreciate.
I honestly think a lot of times what he's saying is really strategic. Like sure. he's getting people all off focus over here, getting the media all off focus over here, and it's strategic. I think he baits. I mean, he is a master at playing the media and getting people off focus. It's classic misdirection, because while they're all focused over here on his last tweet, he's over here nominating this federal judge and that federal judge, and doing real things, like you said, what he's doing. I mean, sure. The border walls is going to be complete.
Sure. And I think that pains people, but I think that's I think that is also his one big mistake.
Yeah.
Because, when he's
not winning hearts and minds with his tweets and his flippant language,
Yeah. If you look at the way a standard company is set up, you have a CEO, then you have vice presidents of different departments. You have a human resources department. You have maybe a PR department. You have all of these different facets, and the CEO's job is to go out and promote the vision of the company to be that centralized person to grow.
The people, the resources to accomplish different things.
But right now what we see is where, and I think, I hope this is not true, but all of the outwardly stuff that's happening, I think probably isn't happening as great as it could be internationally, because the VPs aren't doing their jobs, which are the governors, right? So the governors are completely failing, whether it's ours here or what's her name, Kate whatever, and Kate Brown in Oregon, or they're failing. There's such an internal failure happening that the guy who's out supposed to be doing all of these great things, and that's where I'm actually giving him kudos, because how he's being successful internationally at this point, having to deal with all of the failures within the core substructure of the country, just
not to mention the sabotage.
Yeah, it absolutely amazes me.
Yeah. The dude's, he is truly amazing. He will go down in history as probably the greatest president. I think history will be very kind to President Trump, but he is truly amazing. I think that's why I just I think that's why a lot of Americans just take the tweets and the stupidity that is there at times, or the pettiness, my wife will say. with a grain of salt, because ultimately it's what he's doing. And who else could have done what he did?
I actually brought, I use my dad.
Is there any other person on earth?
Let me
did. I mean, unseat all of those politicians, never run for office before. The first time he runs for office, he's running for president of the United States. And with his quirkiness and his spray tan and everything, all of the weird things about him, he's the president of the United States. And not only that, in 3.5 years was sabotage from within and ineffectiveness of leadership, around the country. Look at all that he's got done. And he's faced impeachment. He's faced coronavirus. He's faced the Mueller investigation. He's faced unprecedented spying by our national security apparatus, again, targeting him. He's faced court battle after court battle for his financial records. They've gone after his family. They've gone after his kid. And he's still slugging it out every single day.
So let me ask you a tough question then, because this is a question I've been asking behind the scenes, because you kind of set yourself up for it. All right. Yeah. In all fairness.
Yeah, sure.
So let's assume that Trump, let's assume it's 4 years from now. Let's assume that Trump wins the White House. In 4 years from now, we have to have a new president. Mm-hmm. Okay. Who would that nominee be for you that would make sense? And I'm going to tell you my answer, or who's a group of nominees that would make sense based on our current, president and how he's progressing his initiatives. Who would make sense as a nominee that you would stand behind in 2024?
Maybe Matt Gaetz, maybe, but I don't know that there's I don't know that I see somebody out there right now, 4 years from now, that I could say today is the guy or the gal.
How about Elon Musk?
I don't know where Elon Musk stands on a lot of stuff. So he's got the money. He's definitely a leader. He's definitely bold. He'll do things that. So I like that about him. But where does he stand on a bunch of different policies? I don't know.
He's actually extremely conservative.
Is he?
Extremely conservative. If you start reading about him. The other one I throw out there is Mark Cuban, right? And Mark Cuban's extremely
a wild card. I mean, he's definitely got some conservative viewpoints, but then he's got some real liberal viewpoints. To me, he's a little bit of a wild card. But I like the fact that he's been very critical of Trump, but he's also involved. So I think he's definitely more of a centrist. If not knowing where he really stands on different social or here's the thing. I remember a time in our country where we really didn't get that, the country wasn't that, we didn't fight about all these different social causes and social issues. There was just some core fundamentals that the Republican Party stood for this and Democrats stood for this, and you just had to kind of look at the candidates and then vote for which one you thought was best. Now it's we have to fight along all these minor issues of social this and social that, when really it's the big rocks that really matter, right? I mean, all the different social things. And I wish, we would get back to, politicians just really, really communicating their message on the big rocks. What is it really that's important? Healthcare, small business.
Dan actually brought that up on yesterday's show when we were talking about the Mormons, right? And what's important and what we're focusing on versus, we're focusing on this, but this is so small.
Really, yeah.
Versus the big picture.
The media wants it, this, going back to BLM, the media wants us to think that racial injustice has become systemic, right? It wasn't systemic for the last 30 years. We were making real progress, decade after decade, but now all of a sudden we've regressed to systemic racism somehow in the last 10 years.
So I'm going to bring up 3 points which are kind of they're meant to be kind of humorous, right? So I was, and the reason I asked you that is because I was involved in a real conversation. And my point being is that I don't know if I have enough trust in anybody who is a politician to run our country, right? Because we've actually seen where somebody Yeah, and somebody was elected to the presidency who has done a better job than all of the politicians, right?
100%. Yeah, I mean that's why I think the American people wanted that. They were like, we're tired of politicians screwing us over every election cycle. I mean, every 2 years, it's like the American people can look back and go, "Yep, we got screwed again. Yep, we got screwed again.
They
Yep,
told
we
us,
got screwed again."
they told us what we wanted to hear until they got into office. And their first job was to get elected, and their second job was to stay elected.
Yeah,
Right? So then the second part is, somebody said it, and I'm going to answer the question that I asked you. I think that the only person that I would vote for who is a current politician in 2024 is Ted Cruz. He literally, when I look at him, because the current climate has forced me to learn about who's there.
sure. What do they really stand for? What are their decisions? Like, what have they actually done in the past? What does it say about them, right? Because people, like you said, they say what we want to hear, but oftentimes what they say, if you go back and look at their record, it's a completely different record.
And the other one would maybe be Tulsi Gabbard, and she's on the other side of the aisle.
What about Kristen Noemi?
Never heard of them.
So she's
or her.
She's the governor of I think North Dakota. She's really smart and has done as a governor, has done a fantastic job of navigating through COVID with her state. Has been real liberty minded from her decision making, in terms of what she's done and not done. The state never shut down. They're still not mandating masks. She's actually said, look, our people are smart people. They can make the decisions and weigh the risks themselves. They don't need me to be telling them how to weigh the risks for their lives every single day. Those are some of the things I've heard her say. So Kristen Noemi is definitely she's done a good job just leading her state for sure.
And then the joking side, so this is the humorous side, is I would just vote for anybody who didn't make the flight logs for Jeffrey Epstein's island, right?
And I think that's part of what happens when you become a politician. Like these freshman congressmen that go in and go to Washington. I mean, tell me if you weren't the deep state, that your first goal wasn't to compromise every single freshman congressman that comes into Washington. Get them compromised, whether it's a flight to Epstein Island or something along those lines or something similar. Get it documented, get them on tape with it, and now you've got that congressman or congresswoman for life. I mean, as long as they're in office and they continue to vote the way that they need to vote, then that stuff remains secretive, But what brings that point up is my wife and I have talked about that, and we wonder what's happened with John Roberts at the Supreme Court, right? Like, he's now voting in ways that you would go, where is this coming from out of left field? And you also see it happen with some of these. I saw that happen with Paul Ryan, when he was Speaker of the House, it was I really liked him early in his earlier days, and all of a sudden he became Speaker of the House, and was like, who the hell is this guy? Where did he? When did he get compromised?
The Supreme Court thing is kind of, that's a tough conversation, because John Roberts I think he's proving that the Supreme Court justices need term limits. Just
sure.
And I'm with you. I mean, if you look back at how he performed, and I think his life has changed. So I would encourage you to. I was reading about him, and it actually, some of the things that you don't read, that aren't prevalent within the media, and you just start reading about people, and then you realize that their life and their path in life has changed their views.
But that's the concern, right? Because when you talk about the Supreme Court, it shouldn't be about your personal views. It should be about the law and the Constitution. And I see him making decisions that are more about whatever personal views than they are about the Constitution. And that's the compromising that I think is happening. You get people compromised in one way, shape, or form,
and that actually creates a great argument for term limits.
Sure, it does.
I mean,
we need term limits in Congress for sure, and I don't see why we shouldn't have term limits in the Supreme Court as well.
Yeah, put in your 8 years and give somebody else the chance. I see these the federal the
Also
big
makes him a representative of the people. I mean, you got a guy like Biden who's been in freaking office for 50 years. Like, how is that representative of the generations, right? I mean, he needs to be gone, right? He should be done out of politics and done after whatever, 10 years, whatever you want to give it, 5, 10, 15 years, maybe max.
How do you take a handful of people that are in Congress with Pelosi, Schumer, what's the other guy, McConnell, Schiff, and
Lifers.
Combined, they've been in Congress for twice as long as our country has been.
Yeah,
it has been a country.
And yet they're gonna somehow today or this next year, this next election cycle, they're gonna fundamentally transform America for the better. But they've been there for 30, 40, 50 years, and look at where we're at today.
I'm going to share a secret with you that nobody knows. Do you know why I can't vote for Biden? Because he actually said earlier that if he were elected to be president, he would cure cancer. Do you remember that?
I don't know. I don't remember him saying that, but it doesn't surprise me. I mean, he said a lot of stupid shit.
It was very early on, and I was deeply offended by that. And you know how hard it is to offend me on anything. But I thought to myself, I said, so you're telling me that if you're not elected to be the president of this country, that you're not going to cure cancer?
Mm-hmm.
Shame on you.
Mm-hmm.
Right? That literally you lost my vote by drawing a line in the sand of putting people's lives on the line for you being elected president. And I don't care about the rest. That was
the same thing today with all this civil unrest and the looting and the lack of coming out firmly against it. And even, I mean, I still can't believe that we have Biden at the very top of the Democrat Party, but all of them are not denouncing this defund the police movement and, restricting crowd control and pepper spray and tear gas and, all the other crowd control devices they have, water, whatever it might be. I mean, they're literally they're castrating the police and letting the mob turn loose on cities, and these Democrats are not denouncing it. And it's literally causing citizens and kids to live in fear every day.
Well, and I think that's my sticking point is, children living in fear, right? That no child, I don't care what color they are, I don't care what their gender is, I don't care what any of that is. The moment that children are living in fear, everybody else who's causing that is wrong, right? Just in core fundamentals.
When we have a genocide happening in our country, I mean, kids are being murdered in our cities at an alarming rate, and yet BLM is important, right? I mean, but those kids that were murdered in Chicago, no one's marching against them. There's no money being funneled to solve the problem in these cities where there's mass murder of kids happening. I mean, Chicago makes the last 6 mass shootings in our country look like child's play.
Have you seen there's actually a Wikipedia page that talks about mass shootings. Have you ever seen that? It goes here.
I don't recall it, but
I would encourage you to look at that because it is extremely telling. It gives the date, it gives the location, and a mass shooting being any more than one person, regardless of outcome, whether they died or were just
really? Yeah.
So as you start looking through the dates, and it's alarming, you start looking through it and you see 2 cities that will stand out immediately to you. The first one being Chicago, obviously, but the second one being Baltimore, right? So it's Baltimore, Chicago, LA, Baltimore, Chicago, North Carolina, right? Or whatever. And it's literally probably 60% of that list is 2 cities with mass shootings. And I think that's also, we talk about mass shootings and, the Dylan Roofs, which that was a tragedy. But I think that we're not calling out the actual mass shootings, which are Chicago. Those are mass shootings.
Yeah. I mean, you got 2, 3, 4 people being shot at, in a group. That's a mass shooting.
In Baltimore, when do you ever hear about a mass shooting in Baltimore? They're happening at least once or twice per week. Mm-hmm. But we're waiting for that one example where some dumbass goes into a Walmart parking lot and starts firing an assault weapon or an AR, and that's the headline.
Right.
Okay. So my call out to the BLM movement is You want to really make forward progression. Start talking about these mass shootings.
Not even talking about it. Start putting up the money. Put money into these cities. But they'll never do that because at the same time, they also fundamentally agree with the defund the police movement. Like get rid of all of our police. Like get rid of them.
Yeah, you don't want that. I'm experiencing that in my life.
Right. But so BLM will never take the money that they're getting and do anything about these problems because that's not what it's for. It's a money laundering scheme called a super PAC for the white liberals in the Democrat Party. Go look at where the majority of the money comes from ActBlue or goes to from ActBlue. It goes. You can see the top 10 people, and Biden's on that list.
Yeah, it's just such a front. I mean, it is just so obvious. But if you tell the Karen on the left that that this is you could hold it up in front of their face and say, here's the truth, the absolute unbiased truth, and you'll see some pushback on my stuff where I just say, here's the metrics, and that's what I'm going to do with that list. I'm going to publish that list, and I'm going to say, here it is. Here's the metrics, and then I'm going to break it down by here's how many black police chiefs there are. Here's how many black or female police chiefs there are.
Mayors, governors. I mean,
absolutely. So here's the numbers. Go ahead and form your argument because here's just the metrics. And I think you'll be surprised by it because, I'll allude to what's on that list. Over 80% of all of the mayors in those 340 or 374 cities are Democrats. Over 80%. And I'm talking all the way down to the 374th. You're talking about like Amarillo, Texas at that point. You know what I mean? Or Chillicothe, Oklahoma, or Chillicothe, Ohio. I mean, there's some cities that some people have never even heard of.
Well, the 6 months of 2020 have taught the American people one thing emphatically, and that is who you elect as your mayors and your governors really, really matter.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
Because our lives have been fundamentally changed. Our freedoms have been infringed on in mass, at a mass scale, like no other 6 month period in my entire life. Right. I mean, I'm looking at today, like my kids may not be able to, play hockey this season because you've got governors who are keeping things shut down, acting as if somehow in January 1, COVID's going to magically disappear because we're going to open up sports in January, but not in October or September of 2020. I guess because we think that in January of 2021, COVID's just not going to be a risk anymore. So let's let the kids play in January, but not October.
Or maybe it's just November 3rd.
Yeah, that's what it's going to be, I'm sure. But, it's...
Unless they don't get their way.
Yeah.
I want to do this last thing. I want to give you, I want to allow you to close out the show and go back to the original, right? Because we've talked about a lot of things, but give me 5 minutes, just 5 minutes, and let's go back to the original part of content syndication and the importance of the conservatives to adapt into what is successful, or use that medium, because I think it's just an undervalued medium that you're offering. So I'm gonna give me 5 minutes. Let's go back to why it's so important right now, especially what is today, August something or other, 4th
or 5th. Yeah,
there are less than 90 days. Okay? Yeah, less than 90 days between now and the presidential election. In the battle between conservatives is with all of the liberal networks, be it Google, Facebook, Twitter, whatever. What's the opportunity to overcome and get past that using content syndication?
First is they have to embrace the strategy. It's a strategy, right? You've got to have the right strategy in place for your message, whether you're the Federalist or the Daily Pundit or anybody else, or a politician, or maybe a non-politician, but now running for the first time for an office. If you're going to get elected, you have to get your message out. If you're going to have an impact and an influence on around your cause, whether you're, let's say, the Federalist, who's been censored lately as well, you want to get your message out. You have to have a strategy to get that message out. Content syndication, as you're pointing out, is a very I think a key component of that strategy of getting your message out, and actually in avoidance of censorship, right? Because you will make it impossible for these platforms to completely censor your message if you have more than just one website, right? That's a problem. The Federalist has one website, one Facebook page, maybe a YouTube channel, right? That's it, right? So all they got to do is shut down your Twitter account, your YouTube channel, and now we've seen even websites get shut down, which, with Squarespace shutting down the American Frontlines Doctors website. They took their domain and shut them down because they put their strategy was to put their website and therefore their content and their message on a third-party platform that somebody else owned that could censor them. So in terms of a censorship avoidance or risk mitigation on censorship, along with just the fact that we want to get our message out to as many eyeballs as we can, because ultimately I think it comes back to we're in a battle for winning hearts and minds. And those people who have a message that needs to get out need to embrace a strategy of content syndication. I think the strategy should have both branded and non-branded assets, and then you use services like Quantum Newswire to then really power up those digital assets. And we have to, on Quantum Newswire, because we're publishing directly to ABC, CBS, NBC, Fox related sites, radio stations, they're high power authoritative media sites. We can't publish political content. So in other words, it can't take one side or another. It can be factually based, right? So creating stories that are factually based, that are sourced and cited well, and even linked well, right, with third-party links to those sources, and then syndicating that out will make it a lot harder for censorship, because that's actually what I've done in my some of my recent Facebook posts, because I, like you, have gotten my account shut down in the past. And so when I put out something that I think is really going to be perceived as controversial by Facebook, that is, I'm sourcing and citing, like I'm providing sources and links to the sources, multiple, right? Because it's one source, they could say, well, it's only one source. But if you back up your point with 2 or 3 or 4 different sources, now that content has a lot more weight. It also has more weight in Google's eyes, because when Googlebot sees content that's sourced and cited from many sources and then you also are going to have richer content that Google finds more authoritative as well. So the strategy has to be right. And then once you have a strategy, and I think, most of these places, most of these conservatives, whether they're podcasts, bloggers, media outlets, whatever, they need to have experts like us engaged to help them with the strategy, because you can say, well, you need to do a better job at content syndication, but at the end of the day, they likely don't have anybody on their team or as an agency that they've engaged or as an SEO they've engaged to help them execute a really good strategy. So I think that in part, people like us need to be more involved with these conservative outlets to help them with their strategy. And then once you execute on that, you can use services like Quantum. But ultimately, I'm a big proponent of building that big web ring of branded and non-branded assets, because that's where you're going to be able to drive traffic and have a platform with your content that'll make it really hard for censorship to ever be fully effective.
And it's like putting your content on steroids.
Yeah.
Right? It's exposure. And when we look at why people are using social media platforms, publishing to a website, doing blogs, or this format with video, I want to be real clear that Quantum actually allows the opportunity to put that content through syndication on steroids, so that when you look at the value, right? And I'm a user of your platform, right? I mean, I want to be very clear on that. And I'm not pushing your platform because, I'm not getting paid for pushing your platform, right?
Right.
I'm pushing your platform as a user, as somebody who understands the importance of content syndication, both for myself and for my clients or any of the businesses that I own, to push that message out. And my intent of bringing you on today is to share that format to hopefully help this confused conservative group that's doing, what I call the O'Doyle rules from I think it was Happy, or Billy Madison, right?
From Happy Gilmore.
Yeah, but I think it was Billy. Yeah, O'Doyle rules, right? We have to get past this point of thinking that just push, 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 yell, 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 talk at. I mean,
conservatives are playing by the liberal game. Like the liberals control, the media. We know that. It's a fact. We don't have to, argue that.
so
But that doesn't mean that I have to play in their game and play only in their ballpark, so to speak, right? I mean, there's lots of other ballparks besides Google. No, we talked about earlier how Google's a dominant player in the market in terms of search and driving traffic, but they are not the only player. And what gets in Google search, I mean, as much as they may try to censor, if you do a good job of content syndication, Google's just never going to be able to keep up with all the different places that your content ends up in.
Which I know all too well, right?
You got it. Yeah.
So if somebody watching this has an interest, I'm going to put a link to whatever you want in the description of the video. But how do they take the next step? So if the Mark Levins or the Joey Saladino, or there's all different forums and different levels of people who are within this group of people that watch the show. How do they reach out? How do they take that next step with you to learn more and get into that groove of syndicating their stuff?
I would say just connect with me on LinkedIn, Lane Hauk. You can just, it's a pretty unique name, so you can Google search my name or go to LinkedIn and connect with me on LinkedIn. You can go to quantumnewswire.com, which has got more information about Quantum Newswire. There's obviously a contact form there, which gets to me as well. But either quantumnewswire.com or hook up with me on LinkedIn, connect with me on LinkedIn, and then we can talk. I think strategy is a big piece of this. And the strategy will be somewhat the same for all these different people that we're talking about, or just any business in general for that matter. But also the strategy should and will be different depending on who you are and what your message is and who your audience is. One thing we haven't even talked about, but it's a tactic and a tool that should be used by conservatives is we can get location-based audiences, drive ads to location-based audiences, which the click brings them to your content, right? And that completely circumvents Google. You're not reliant on Google or any kind of search for that audience, those people to actually find you or see you. So, we could take the Republican convention, or we could take, any type of, if you're a conservative, you could take any kind of mass gathering, or you could, where do conservatives go? Where do they eat? Where do they go to church? Where do they, whatever. And we can target those audiences and drive ads to those audiences based on their device ID having been identified at a specific location. So it's a way of driving traffic that completely circumvents all search engines. And that's not a tactic that's widely being used, or a strategy that's widely being used by really any business for that matter, but especially politicians and conservative bloggers and what have you, publishers.
I'll tell you a great success story that you weren't involved with, but it was one of my clients. And, we were looking at exposing their platform or their app. It's an app-based company. And they said, well, how do we get our brand in front of,
the right
people? Theirs was just kind of a blanket, right? So I said, well, I said, I'm not going to explain it to you. I said, just trust me, because I have a long-standing relationship with them. I said, put $1,000 into, an advertising, proximity-based advertising campaign. And they said, well, where are we going to, we're trying to do this blanket, right? So what they didn't know is that I took that that ad spend and I put it into proximity-based advertising, and I targeted the airports in major cities. Right. So I literally pinned that location in front of LaGuardia and LAX and Las Vegas and everything else. And next thing you know, it just blew up with app downloads, all of this other stuff. They came back to me and they're like, oh my God, and I probably shouldn't tell people that, but I literally took my proximity pin and I pinned within, a mile,
right
in front of baggage claim. Which meant I was just collecting all of that IP data, all of that user data, just from the comings and goings of the airport. And next thing you know, it just exploded. And that was based on $1,000 for a company, right? It was $1,000. And then they said, well, I said, do you guys want to do it? Yeah, we want to do it again. I think people don't know about that, Lane.
They don't. They don't. I mean, most agencies don't know about this, right? So I teach other agencies here and there. I mean, we have the ability to go in anywhere in North America, and I can get device ID audiences out of any location on the map, any latitude or longitude, whether it be a known point of interest in Google Maps, or I can do a custom geofence around a neighborhood and get device IDs out of that neighborhood going back 12 months in history. So I can't go beyond 12 months of history. But you can go back 12 months on anywhere in US or Canada.
Going back to, and I'm not trying to plug a different service, but and that exact service doesn't work anymore. I'm not trying to keep you, but
yeah.
Do you remember the old royalty system?
Yes.
You in its current form.
Yeah, the beacon system, the royalty beacon system.
So what I used to do, I would have these ambulance chasers, like personal injury attorneys, and I'd get them on that royalty system, and they'd just go around with those little tokens, and they'd walk in
on the ER, right?
Yeah. Or if it was a marketing company or anybody, if they wanted
busy intersections that always had accidents.
Yeah. Or the elevator call box in an elevator of a skyrise, and it's just going up collecting information up and down. There's so many tools out there that are just people don't realize. And I hope that some of the people that watch this get in touch with you and realize their heads will explode once they have a conversation with you and see, one, what you can do, and two, that you don't have to be George Soros to afford it.
No, not at all. Yeah, not at all.
It's extremely affordable when you look at the end result versus what you're paying for. I think we're in a good spot. What do you think?
Man. It was awesome. I enjoyed the time.
So the end result is get a hold of Lane. He and my punch in the face to the conservatives, because I have to say this, is pull your heads out of your asses, get organized, trust in the people and the formats of what you don't know, but now you do know. So pull your heads out of your asses, get in touch with somebody like Lane, or it can be Lane, or it can be somebody else who deals with content syndication. And don't just sit there and make me watch you cry about how Google censored you or Facebook censored you, because nobody cares. I mean, they just don't. Just either stand up and do something, or sit back and, I don't know, cry about it.
No reason to sit around and wait for it to change. It may change through legislation and through, civil litigation, but that's not going to happen soon. It's certainly not going to happen in the next 90 days.
Right. And there's 89 days.
Yep.
No time like the present. 89 days.
Time to activate and go, man. We've got 89 days to save our country from Joe Biden and the crazy mob, Democrat mob that behind him that they'll rule him. We know that he'll be a puppet. He's already a puppet of people. He just we cannot let that guy get into the White House.
I agree. Lane, thanks for being here. It is always a pleasure.
Man. Yeah, awesome. Love the time. Appreciate you and your contributions to our industry for sure. Thank you.
With that. Let's do this again soon and in smaller portions.
Sounds good, buddy. Have a great day.
You too.
See you.